Hey, what's up, guys? You're now listening to Devo with Uncle Theo. Today is day 276, and we're going to cover Matthew chapters 7 through 9. So remember, as you study the book of Matthew, know that Matthew is arguing from the perspective, setting out to prove that Jesus is king. And we've seen how this book is divided, either with using the geographical structure, with his Galilean ministry first, and then he turns to Jerusalem. But we also talked about the fivefold narrative teaching structure. So far, we've covered the prologue of chapters 1 through 4, where we saw the genealogy where God picks back up speaking again, and Matthew giving Jesus legal credentials. And in chapter 2, his prophetic credentials. In chapter 3, the divine approval of the Father. And in chapter 4, his spiritual credentials. In chapter 5 through 7, we see his theological and authoritative credentials. So chapter 7 wraps up the Sermon on the Mount. Remember, we covered the 6 antitheses. You have heard it said, but I say to you. Not it is written, but you have heard it said. So you see, he's rebuking their interpretation of the law. And so you have to get clear that Jesus is not giving a new law here. He's simply rightly interpreting the law of Moses. So what you don't want to do with the Sermon on the Mount is put Moses and Jesus at odds with one another, because Jesus inspired what Moses wrote. Now, don't get me wrong. Jesus does give new laws because he is a king and a priest and he can do that. But he's rightly interpreting the law of Moses on the Sermon on the Mount, and he's fulfilling it to the T. And he moves into chapter 7 and he picks up with judgment. He teaches on the difference between hypocritical judgment and righteous judgment. And a lot of people take the position that only God can judge me. And that's true based on what will happen in eternity. But God has set up in humanity the ability for us to judge with righteous judgments, so we don't have to meet him and to be judged by him. So Jesus condemns hypocritical judgment, but he teaches how to judge rightly. Then he moves into the parables on the narrow and the wide way, on true and false teachers, on true and false confessions, and then on the 2 types of foundation. And chapter 7 ends with remember that statement that we talked about? You'll get a teaching block, then narrative, and you'll know it's divided by this statement here. Listen to it. Chapter 7, verse 28. When Jesus had finished these words, the crowds were amazed at his teaching, for he was teaching to them as one having authority and not as their scribes. And so that ends the first teaching block. And now we're going to move back into narrative. So in chapters 8 and 9, we're going to get 3 series of 3 miracles. And each one is followed by a call to follow me, or an exhortation on why Christ should be followed. Let me give you an example of what that looks like. So in chapter 8, you'll see the story of the leper cleansed, then the centurion servant healed, then Peter's mother-in-law healed. Then right after that, you get the call of Jesus said to them, "Follow me," and allow the dead to bury their own dead. Then we move into 3 more miracles. The sea is still, the demons are cast into the swine, then the paralytic is forgiven, and then you get the call in chapter 9, verse 9. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at a tax collector's booth, and he said to him, "Follow me," and he got up and followed him. Then we get 3 more miracles. The woman with the hemorrhaging, one whose sight is restored, then one whose speech is restored. And then you get a call. He says, seeing the people, he felt compassion on them because they were distressed and dispirited like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to the disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Therefore beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into the harvest. And that's your final explicit call. So notice now, we're now seeing Jesus's divine credentials because he has the ability to perform miracles and to do things that have never been seen or recorded before. But break those miracles in groups of 3, and between each of those miracles, you'll get a call. And that'll lead us to chapter 10, and know how well Matthew is laying out this material to argue the case that Jesus is king, to convince the Jews. And this should even convince you, because you've spent 9 months in the book which the Jews use of the Old Testament. So we're coming out of the Old Testament, seeing these prophecies fulfilled, and seeing the Christ who was all throughout the Old Testament, working on behalf of his people, now taking on flesh and operating in humanity among his people. Jesus is on the scene. He's here. And he'll call his 12 disciples tomorrow as representation of the 12 tribes of Israel. Just like he went on a mountain to associate with Moses, just like he went in the wilderness to associate with Adam and David, he'll pick his 12, just like the 12 tribes of Israel. Then we'll see the 70 as well, which represents the 70 nations found in the table of nations in Genesis 10. Every box is being checked if we look closely. And Jesus is without a shadow of a doubt our suffering servant, our branch, our Messiah, our King. Let's worship him and continue to see him as we walk through the book of Matthew. You guys take care and have a good day.